recorded at Get a Grip Studios in Toronto, Canada. Get a Grip Management production and in association with the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. Presented by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, the National Lighting Bureau, the Illuminating Engineering Society, and of course, the International Dark Sky Association. This is Starving for Darkness. Hello, folks. Welcome to the Starving for Darkness podcast with Jane Slade and Michael Colligan. Before we get into it, I want to tell you quickly about the magicians. That's right. The magicians down at Evluma. Go to evluma.com. Greg, they're rethinking LED in all directions.
And here's a perfect example is a lot of people have these corn cob LED bulbs. They have one too, but very different from everyone else. First of all, it's small profile, which is important. So you can get it to fit in the fixture. It's got 20 kV, 10K surge protection. A lot of them have half that or less. So that means it's going to last. 10-year warranty on it. And it's 2K to 5K in color temps. So it's got the whole range, everything you need.
Just keep it low though, folks. Just keep it low.
Keep it low. You've got wireless dimming capability with your Connect LED Bluetooth app that you can go right into it. And then the final thing I got to touch is a photo control fail safe. Now that's actually firmware built into the bulb itself. So if your photocell goes out, the bulb learns over time how the photocell operated and continues to operate as though the photocell's working. Never need to worry about that thing again.
That's hitting you with a lot of magic right there. Rethinking LED in all directions. Go to evluma.com. That's evluma.com. Now, Starving for Darkness.
Hello, listeners. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Starving for Darkness. My name is Jane Slade, and I'm here with my co-host, Michael Colligan. And we are so excited to have our guest today, Dr. Joshua Rosenthal, who is a doctor of sleep medicine. I'm so excited to dig into this portion of humanity with you. And what I want to talk about is your background, which is that you are an ENT, an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And you are also double board certified in both otolaryngology and sleep medicine, and you are a fellow of the American College of Surgeons. So there's so much to dig into here, and I have been studying up on your expertise. But I want to start off the podcast with a question for you, which is, please tell me about an experience that you had underneath the dark sky that was profound for you, that moved you, that left you with a memory.
Oh, wow. Well, we don't have such, well, first, let me just thank you guys for having me on again. We don't have such clear skies anymore. And I think, that is probably, we should be having more profound moments under the dark sky. For me, I the first thing that comes to mind is, when I started practicing sleep medicine, I created a little logo for my business at the time, and I was driving one night. It was a beautiful, clear night, which doesn't happen as often as it should. And the moon was in a crescent, but it was almost smiling. The crescent, was kind of the angle, and it was almost like a smiley face. And to me, I just saw that, and I said, that's, I was going to run with that at the time. I've since abandoned that. But the point is, it was the beauty of looking at the moon and just seeing the stars and the moon, and it just caught me, and I saw something beyond, obviously, what was there. And there's a lot that, when you just think of the space and the galaxy and the stars and how many light years we are away from, the light that we see. I mean, it is really amazing. And we are just little specks, in this large, vast, universe. And so I think, that it really is a microcosm of the physics and our understanding of, astrophysics, quantum physics. Our understanding of these sciences is really so minuscule as well. And so I think that's an interesting kind of correlation that we really are at our infancy of understanding a lot of how the world works.
So you are an ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor. How did you get into sleep medicine?
Yeah, so quite honestly, my interest was in sleep apnea.
Hmm.
And that's probably when most people think of sleep disorders, that's probably the most common thing people think about. And the truth is, in getting board certified and the education, the training for that, I learned that, wow, there is a ton of other stuff that's quite interesting
Hmm.
besides just sleep apnea. And sleep apnea is kind of, I consider it low-lying fruit because sleep is such a complicated thing. Looking at how it breaks down is very interesting, but sleep apnea is just an end product that's kind of far down the road, in my opinion, of all the things that happened way before that. And, um, in my own life, I ballooned up to about 220 pounds after I graduated residency. And of course, my ability as a physician, as somebody who just spent $250,000 on his training to become a doctor, was so limited in trying to help myself. And of course, all
Mm.
I knew was diet and exercise, which is what everybody thinks of as the penultimate way to lose weight. But I, like everybody else, struggled with that too. And so it took me a while doing my own citizen science and trying to figure things out. And that led me down a lot of different rabbit holes, which connected back up to sleep and light. And then I knew I was on the right path to try to figure things out.
So I hadn't even thought we were going to touch about weight gain, and I'm suddenly very intrigued personally.
Okay.
So what's the correlation there?
Well, so, sleep is probably one of the greatest health metrics that we don't look at enough. My experience as a sleep physician, the one great thing about sleep medicine, it's very cut and dry. Sleep problem,
Hmm.
sleep test, sleep problem, sleep test. And so, of course, we're looking for a disease, and, sleep apnea is one of those. But I had all these people that I was studying with the sleep test, and all of them claimed to have a sleep problem. And, it's kind of like in business that customers always right. So I knew they were right. I mean, I knew there was something. If you're complaining of a sleep problem, you're probably not making it up. But if they didn't have a finding that labeled them with a disease, I felt like I couldn't help them because I didn't know what to do. And so those patients started to kind of stick in my craw and kind of kept me up at
Mm.
night thinking, what do I need to figure out how to help these people? And so I really dug deeper at that point. And so sleep itself controls your glucose metabolism, your fat burning, your immune
Mm.
system. That might be important in today's goings ons. So, these are all controlled by hormones, all that play a part. Melatonin, obviously, everybody knows melatonin is kind of the hormone of darkness, but it's actually a
Yeah.
hormone that's activated during daylight, but it is the kind of conductor. And once that starts to go away, all of a sudden now you start to see you don't make growth hormone, you don't make testosterone or the appropriate amount of sex hormones, you don't make any leptin, and you become leptin resistant, and that's the hormone that decides whether or not you should burn fat. So there's just some of the
Wow.
loose connections, and it gets a lot tighter when you really go deep into the biochemistry. But so if you don't have good sleep, you will gain weight potentially, um, a host of other problems. It's connected to the neurotransmitters, so it goes depression, anxiety, headaches. You can really connect this to autoimmunity. Um, so there's really a lot of deep connections to health problems today. And if you look, you'll find they tie into your circadian rhythms, your hormones, and they all tie to sleep.
In your opinion, what is the number one issue facing people and sleep today?
Well, I think, as people maybe listening or watching this podcast, we have lost touch with the biophysics of how, health and our bodies really work. And we are actually beings of light. And a lot of people say that and they mean that in a very, woo kind of
Yeah,
out
baby.
there sort of a way, and, I love me some woo too, but I want the hard science. But when you look at the science, I
Yeah.
mean, this has been studied back from when Fritz Popp started measuring biophotons from plants and animals. And, we emit light that can't be seen, but it is still light. And,
Hmm.
so we work on light. We've used the sun and the darkness, the light and the day cycle to run our biology. And so our body knows when to make the donuts based on what time of day it is. And so the first question you should ask is, how do I know what time of day it is? And so right now, as we are all staring in front of a LED sort of monitor, okay, we are getting light that has a color temperature of noon. And you can say, I don't know, it's about 2 o'clock right now. That's not so bad. But what happens
Mhm.
when that later at night you're getting that same light, or you look at your phone to check some text or Facebook or an email or whatever it is, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and you're telling your brain, your master clock, that it's noon. Well, then you didn't make the donuts. And so, melatonin requires, it was designed for absolute darkness, but we don't have absolute darkness anymore. And the greatest suppressor of melatonin is blue light. And so most screen technology, LED, any sort of artificial light, usually has a pretty high peak in the blue spectrum. And so when you actually look at the colors that make up like the rainbow, that's everything, Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue and violet. The LED white light, which we think of as white, if you actually look at the spectrum, you'll see there's a large peak in the blue and there's not a lot of
Mhm.
red. And,
Mhm.
unfortunately, we have a receptor in our skin, in our eyes, and our fat tissue that looks to see if blue light is present, and it's called melanopsin. And so the
Mhm.
constant bathing of blue light and artificial, frequencies emitted by the technology that we're all so, closely related to now. And it's part of our culture and our jobs and our occupations. So we can't really divorce ourselves of it. But that light, those frequencies are telling our body a certain signal, and there are consequences.
Mhm. So you have an ebook that you suggest to people to read. It's a free ebook if I'm correct. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a starter, to get people to dip, I think, their toes into thinking a little bit differently. I mean, one is, how do we measure our sleep? And
Mhm.
that's the biggest problem, and every once in a while, I will look at my sleep with different tools. Right now, I have a ring. Many people know about the Aura Ring, but I would tell you, I think the Aura Ring is really far inferior to giving you a good reading. I would say, if you really look at it, you'll say, oh, hey, I was awake. It didn't see that. When you actually look, the only true measurements that I really trust are measurements from brain waves, so from
Mhm.
something that's going to be on your head measuring an EEG style reading to make a sleep determinant, because that's our sleep test. It has a brain, component, an EEG component, and that's how we stage what stage of sleep you're in. And so while these devices are helpful and convenient, and wearing something on your finger is a lot better than having something on your head, I think there's also a false hope that what this little thing says is the gospel, and so, but you need to know the quality of your sleep. And I've found that, people with severe sleep apnea who have a very big problem, they sometimes say, hey, I sleep fine. So what you realize when you've seen enough people like that is you can't tell me how great your sleep is because you're unconscious. So when you realize that your estimate of how good your sleep is already not a valid determination, that's the first step, is realizing that the only evidence is something that's tangible, not how you think your sleep is. Because a lot of people think, well, I put my head down at time A and I woke up at time B, so look how great I did. That's 8 hours, and they say 7 8 hours, I got it. But the quality therein, if you don't have any melatonin, you're not kicking off the different stages appropriately. You may not be staying in the stages long enough. You may not be making your hormones as you should. Melatonin is very important in mitochondrial health, which is, in my opinion, the next level of health, because the mitochondria are kind of the transducer of light signals. And so
Mm.
they are measuring your environment. And so this light day cycle is just one of the many ways your body is measuring the environment. It wants to know what day it is, what season it is. I mean, how do you think your body knows how to run different, we'll say, biochemical technology for whether you live on the equator or whether you live at the North Pole? Chemical process. And those all get whittled down to how the mitochondria processes energy and information, and it's all physics. The sad part here is, as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, I spent $250,000 to become a doctor, only to learn, a decade in, that wow, I got to go back to medical school and learn how the physics side works, because
Mhm.
we are biochemical beings that translate biochemistry from the biophysics. And I think that's where people have missed some of the boat. And so we don't realize that sitting in front of a screen all day and all night is potentially one of the most dangerous things you could do for your health.
So
Mm-hmm.
just to jump in here, it's interesting. My brother was I got a million notes already. So he was a float plane pilot. Okay, so he would fly people into northern Canada, land on lakes and stuff like that. So he befriended many of the First Nations people that live up there and would fish with them and went on hunting expeditions with them and stuff like that. And they would tell him there's food you can't eat actually. Okay, so they would say, no, 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 you're not going to eat this. And he didn't really want to eat it because it didn't look particularly appetizing what they were eating, but they were eating, different kinds of foods that you really have to grow up with. You can't just decide that you're going to start eating the polar bear liver, for example, or something. I
Mm-hmm.
can't remember what it was, but it was some type of meat. And they said, no, 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 you can't eat that you just have this stuff here. And so, yeah, there is a difference between, different climates and where people live, and it's anecdotal. And now I know it. There's a sleep and light portion to it. But I was going to ask you. You said that we've lost touch with with rhythms. Would you say that that's better described as took for granted? Because I don't know if we ever had a touch on it. Like if
Well, I
people
mean, if
ever
you look at
understood it.
native Aboriginal cultures, just think, the Egyptians worshiped the sun. I mean, a lot of cultures they
Hmm.
were, they ran around
Interesting.
barefoot, half naked. They were connected to the earth, to the sun, to the moon, the cycles of the planet. Um, and I guess, I would say as a species, as human beings, where we went wrong is we used this creative masterpiece that was placed between our ears, which separates us from everybody else, is that we can think so much in a much more complex way. But all the developments that we've made, we never considered what is the impact on our own health because we don't really understand health, I think, deep enough in the way that we need to.
Or we see
We're
ourselves as above health. Like in
right. Well,
some,
it's the entitlement that we created
yes.
it. We've claimed it. Yes, we can do it, and we're going to do it.
Yeah, it's the
100%.
Marshall McLuhan said first we shape technology, then technology shapes us. And so it's like who you actually are. And but what I wanted to
Well, I
ask you,
think healthcare is exactly that statement.
yep,
Look at healthcare. Healthcare is a result. Why do nations that do not have the same, standard of living and develop, underdeveloped nations, why is their health better in a lot of ways?
sure,
They still have
yep,
certain things, problems with disease, but their health, they don't have fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis and
no,
depression and anxiety,
they die from
and there are people.
malaria or other
Right. But
diseases like
even they
that. Yeah,
run around and thrive with malaria.
sure,
I have a friend who went to, Africa, and the people look like Michael Jordan running around with malaria, and HIV. And so it's not the same as what we think. You or I get malaria, we'd be hospitalized and near death, but there are
yeah, for
people
sure.
thriving. Yeah. So
I talked to another doctor at a dinner party, and he had mentioned to me that when they're one of the things he does to find out if someone is depressed or if they're lacking in sleep. So he said a lot of like diagnosed clinical depression is actually somebody that's not sleeping enough. That's what he told me. So he said the first thing they do is they do a sleep test on them. And if their sleep test with the little all the things they put on it, and if the sleep test comes back with a certain amount of yes, you're receiving positive sleep, then they look into the source is a general depression. Would you agree with that as well? Is that like a place to start for that kind of a situation?
well, I think today, things are so different today than they were 10 years ago. If you asked me that
Mm,
question 10 years ago, I would have said sure. But I think today, we want to protect people from themselves. And there are people with severe depression
mhm.
and mental issues that are really bad. But, there's a crosstalk between, your neurochemistry and your sleep. And so insomniacs are known to have a higher rate of depression and anxiety, and people with depression and anxiety also have a higher rate of having insomnia. So there is this kind of bidirectionality, and it really makes sense when you understand that a lot of these, hormones and as I said, neurotransmitters are kind of balanced and harmonized, if you will, or adjusted in sleep, created, and so the same problems that you have when you have poor sleep are going to then throw off your hormones. And so if you have, poor hormones, poor neurotransmitters, well, what is depression? It's a lack of certain neurotransmitters, and how do we, standard medicine gives you pills that try to adjust the balance of these things, whether it be serotonin or dopamine or different drugs like this. And so these are drugs. These are not drugs. These are chemicals that are created and programmed by light frequencies. And this is what's really interesting. And so again, when the light frequencies that we're exposed to are artificial and only, I think the greatest way to look at light, the sun is like a well-balanced diet of light. So, people think a salad is healthy, but, or at least a plate with a lot of different colors of food on it. So it's the same thing. All the colors of the rainbow are in, the sun. When we sit here indoors and are exposed to this, it's like having a Snickers bar, right? Why is that? And I'm not picking on Snickers or Mars Corporation. I have no bad feelings for them. But anyhow, it's one particular major frequency. It's not evenly balanced, right? And so you have to say, have we studied what that will do to a human being? Well, this is the experiment. Look around and you're seeing the results of what a single frequency of light, predominantly during day and even nighttime hours when we're not supposed to have it, what happens? And this is what we're seeing in health today. The health crisis.
We start to starve for darkness. That's what happens.
Well, I mean, the problem is darkness is endangered, is an endangered species. How do you like that?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, we agree.
We
totally agree.
I got called upon by a local resident of Long Island because they were putting up LED street lamps in her area. And she's very sensitive to light issues. And now outside of her window in her bedroom, she now has an LED light that's glaring in. Mm-hmm. And right before the town passed that, Harvard published a study saying there was an increase of breast cancer with LED street lamps. Mm-hmm. Now, what's crazy is not only did the mayor of this town say, well, this is a terrible study. Anyhow, people forget that it's not just the street lamp. It's in our houses.
Sure.
The LED technology in the street lamp is no different from the hi-hat in your house, from the screen, from the tablet, from the phone. All this light is the same. And so we have to kind of not forget that not only have we polluted our indoor environment, we're now polluting the outdoor as well. And so that's, at least I can control my indoor environment. I can control the type of lighting. But if you put it, if I want to walk outside at night and enjoy, starry evening, and there are LED street lamps up, I really don't have any recourse to fix that, And so my choices are to not do that, because I know it's really not good, to be under those lights. It's a problem.
So what does an ideal night of sleep look like in the body? What are some of the incentives? Because I think it's really hard to incentivize people with, put your phone down, don't check Instagram, because that sounds like a negative. But what are they missing? What's the good stuff?
Okay, well, one is there are ways to use technology more safely. We'll touch on that at some point. But the question is, what are the benefits of sleep? Okay, so hormones. So if you are dealing with a stubborn weight that you can't lose, again, that may be related to excess cortisol. That may be related to being leptin resistant. These are all hormones that, again, I have control under sleep and connect to sleep. If you have poor memory, you can't remember things the way you used to, and you go, oh, it's just my age. Well, your brain prunes, your neurons like a gardener pruning a plant to make sure that you can make these connections and remember things. Your brain actually detoxes the bad chemicals that are made from living. We found, there's something called the glymphatic system with a G, not lymph as in L, but glymphatic system. And when you're asleep, your brain literally drains out toxic chemicals from the body. So, there's a myriad reasons to get good sleep. And so those are just some of them. Your immune system is built during your sleep. Really interesting caveat that I like to tell people, when they take rodents, like mice and rats, and put them on a treadmill and sleep deprive them. So they have to continually run to, because they can't fall asleep. They die of sepsis. They die of infection in their blood. So literally sleep deprivation is draining your immune system. And this is a year where I think everybody appreciates a good immune system. So the first thing you can do to help your immune system is make melatonin naturally by
Mm-hmm.
blocking blue light frequencies. It's a very simple start. Now that's not, you know, what I said there has a lot of nuance to it, but you can take a step instantly to start doing that, and there's a lot of ways to do that.
So we are really in a sleep epidemic, I would say, since that most of us have a device in our hands pretty much all the time. And I know that the Illuminating Engineering Society, they have a course on light and health. And one of the things I took away from that course was actually the TV is not really as bad as the phone, because the phone is right up on your retina. And I was watching some interviews with you today, and it's not just that the eye is part of the brain; it's that the eye is the brain. It's just this outer focus of the brain on our faces, basically. So when we have the phone in our hands and we close our eyes and we can see the rectangle, I mean, surely that's some kind of circadian stimulation. So how is this? I want to ask you from the point of view of someone who is delivering all of this information. How do you yourself keep yourself from these temptations?
So there's two approaches, right? One is to, become a hermit and live in, a totally rural area with no light and no technology. And I don't see a lot of people getting online for that experience. And obviously, as a physician, myself, I too am married to technology, whether I like it or not. So, the first thing is these glasses that I'm wearing, have special lenses that block a percentage, about 40% of the blue light. In addition, right now, my screen also has some special software on it to reduce the flicker and to pull out blue
Mm,
frequency light as well. And so, right there, I'm already reducing and mitigating my risk. If you just think of blue light from artificial sources, because not all blue light is bad. The sun has blue light. But if you think of blue light from artificial sources as a toxin, you know, as cigarettes, well, if you smoke a little bit, your risk is only a little bit to get cancer. So the more blue light, the worse off things are. And so, you're going to have some exposures, and how do you mitigate them? And so, one thing is with eye protection, and there's different needs for the daytime because we are meant to have blue light. So you don't want to wear something that completely blocks blue light from your eyes during day, because your brain needs to know it's daytime.
mhm,
And then nighttime, you were designed to have no blue light. So this is where it's a real big issue, because everywhere you go, from the xenon headlamps that in the car that's facing you, if you go out to meet some friends for a drink, or you go out for dinner late, the lighting in the restaurant. So everywhere you go, the street lamps, as we said, everywhere you go, you have these artificial lights. So you can wear a different, kind of lens to block, the harmful frequencies.
So it's interesting because I also I work in the hazardous waste space, okay, as well. I long story there, won't get into it, but I there was a term there that I heard which was particularly scary. They called it incremental creep. Okay, so what happens
mm,
is you bury something in the ground, like some sort of waste, okay, and the groundwater in that area may only move 6 feet a year, okay. And so this place in Switzerland, they buried batteries in the ground inside these steel containers. Okay, and it took about 60 years for the chemicals from the battery to get into the groundwater. And then they started to have all these cancers. And the point that the guy was making is that humans are very good, their science and what you look at are very good at acute problems. So if somebody, has an acute problem all of a sudden because they are hit by a car, I don't know, give me an example. You get sick because of, exposure to some chemical or something like this. Humans are good at identifying it and assessing why it happened, right? So this is caused, mesothelioma comes from exposure to, asbestos particulates in the air. And look at that, we see this causation, we saw the thing, the effect, whatever. But the longer that separation from the consequences is from the cause, the less likely humans are to be able to identify what the cause is, because you could surpass a generation of scientists with it. Okay? And what we've seen in the last 20, 30 years is the incremental increase of blue light at night everywhere, to the point where people forget, as Jane says, they don't even know what they're missing, to the point this incremental creep is in lighting. People just assume that streets were always 100% illuminated uniformly at night. And they forget that you used to have high pressure sodium, very low, or low pressure sodium, very low Kelvin temperature light focused in one area. You know, when we were kids, we're going to play under the street light, right? We're going to, you know what I'm saying? This kind of thing.
Right.
How as a scientist, and as a, someone that, sells light bulbs, how do we get out of that trap of being so short-term focused and not able to see the effects of things over the long term?
Yeah, I mean the big trap is that we assume we understand the workings of the human being well enough that we can add new technology and it doesn't have any impact. And that disconnects to what we said earlier, is that the reason you don't see that chemical damage is because no one's studying the chemical effects on human beings to know, or could even have the idea of how it is going to cause damage, because it's really all systems. Systems analysis is much more difficult because one thing leads to another, needs to another. It's not as linear. A goes to B, goes to C. And we fall into that trap all the time. And the big problem is light is nonlinear. Light is not a, A goes to B, goes to C. It's A goes to Z and beyond in a second. And it happens at light speed. And that's, pun intended, right? I mean, what people don't realize is, and you mentioned earlier about the TV isn't as bad as the phone. I mean, again, it's, well, do you understand light? I mean, incandescent bulb, which would be the best light bulb from a blue light,
Sure.
how much blue light to red light there is, was the first mismatch of our circadian rhythms because we weren't designed. Clothing was, even if you want to go back even further, clothing was really the first mismatch because we have receptors on our skin that detect blue light.
Okay, I have to ask you this question. I was going to wait, but I just have to ask you right now, okay? I have to. So I do another lighting podcast called the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast, and we've interviewed a lot of health effects. Is a massively huge subject. So, Dr. Mark Ray, Dr. Mariana Figueroa, Dr. Jennifer Veach, and I could just keep reeling them off to you. But I've always asked them, and they kind of were not sure. This is a tough one to ask, but are sunglasses bad for you? Like, for years, okay? For years, we've been told the sun is horrible for you. Layer yourself in 60-degree sunscreen. Make sure you put on your eyeglasses that automatically reduce the sunlight into your eyes. If not, wear sunglasses. And it's like now they're like, well, we can bring all that sunlight inside with these fancy lights. And it's going to be the same as the sun. And I'm thinking like, well, are we going to have to wear sunglasses inside now? So what I've always wondered is, like, number one, I'm not extreme on anything. Like, I think if you go lie in the beach all day long in the sun, you should probably put on some sunscreen. If you're there, throw a pair of shades on, maybe you look cool. Okay. But you have people that literally live in a condo. They go down to the parking garage. They get in their car. They have SPF 15 all over their face. Okay. They put it all over their hands or whatever, SPF 50, whatever. Then they put on a pair of sunglasses. They drive their car to another parking garage.
Put the hat on. Don't forget they brought the hat.
Put the hat on. They drive to another parking garage, right? And then they go in that parking garage and they go up and, well, maybe not now. Maybe they're just inside all day. I don't know. But I have this feeling like that sunglasses might be one of those things that's preventing people from developing vitamin D. And one of the things that I notice about sunglasses, once you start wearing them, they're kind of addictive. Like, the more you wear, there are people that can never go outside without sunglasses. And I'm not talking about older people that have retinal damage or, have problems with their eyes. It's a different situation. I'm talking about regular people, no eye problems, no eyeglasses, will refuse to go outside in sunshine without their sunglasses on. And there's almost like an addiction to it. Is my gut instinct that perhaps the overuse of sunglasses is actually bad for you and sunscreen?
Yeah, you're spot on a lot of issues. You may not know the science or why, but 100%. So I'll take you back to the best example from the original guy who figured out how light affects living creatures, which is John Ott. He has a great book called Health and Light. And in that book, he talks about, one of the African hospitals, the owner of the hospital, the Aboriginals, the people that lived around there. Some white men, the white man came down and they liked the sunglasses and they started wearing the sunglasses. They traded and bartered for the sunglasses. And so they'd be half naked, doing their thing, wearing the sunglasses, and they saw spikes of cancer in the hospital,
Wow.
from the sunglasses. So, unfortunately, the eye is the instructions. The eye is where you get instructions on how to run your body. And so
I
anything, so
finally
I would
got the
say,
answer. I
yeah,
love it. I love it when I'm redeemed.
sunglasses are like putting a tarp on the plant you're trying to grow in your backyard.
Exactly.
You can water it, you could put nutrients in, but it's not getting the important energy and information. And I think what we also forget is sunlight is not just energy, it's information. There is a ton of information.
Mm.
And when you wear sunglasses, you're changing anything that changes that frequency, even just glasses. Wearing glasses outside. When I'm outside, I put my lenses down or I put them on top of my
Mm-hmm.
head because I want to get that information into my eyes. That, it gets through the eye. It builds a lot of those neurotransmitters, activates them, programs them. It gets into the blood. It energizes the red blood cells, which then ferry that light information. And when you think about it, I mean, the amount of frequencies of light that we have, we're talking about this almost near infinite supply of information that can be transmitted. And ultimately, people forget that proteins are really little antennas. If anyone's ever seen, there's when they communicate in space, they have these antennas and they have all these little weird shapes, that they make these antennas. It's not just like a little, like, old school radio antenna that telescopes out. And that's how they communicate, with some of these, space devices. And, the truth is every protein in our body has a shape and a resonance, and it interacts with different frequencies of light. And, UV light, which has been so damned by science, is really important because a lot of the compounds are UV light traps that soak up UV light, and a lot of the neurotransmitters. I mean, if you look at the absorption of a lot of amino acids, it's in the UV range. And here's the next crazy step, is that we have a UV light sensor in our retina. So if UV light is so bad, why did nature, God, whoever you want to call it, design us by putting a receptor for UV light in our eye?
This
We
goes
also
all
have
back,
it on our skin.
Doc.
I mean, it's right there.
This goes all back to that thing of us seeing us somehow separate, like as if
Yeah.
what hurts the turtles, the birds can fly over there if they don't
Right.
like our lights that are so great for us. It goes back to that sort of hubris that humans seem to feel when they make interventions. This intervention is good. Wear sunglasses. And then there's marketing. Oh, you're so cool. Yeah. All this kind of stuff that goes with it. And then the companies that making not lots of money on those sunglasses, I mean, I'm not here to kick Luxottica or whoever in the butt, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that they sold pseudoscience to people in the form of, and like there's only a couple businesses that are this popular. One is perfume, water in a little jar for $100. Right? You want to buy some water in a jar for $100, and then sunglasses. You want to buy a 10-cent piece of glass and some metal for
Right.
$500. Super profitable businesses. Okay, so then they go and they operate like tobacco. Not that I don't know about perfume, but they operate like tobacco companies, where their hypothesis conclusion is already assumed, and so they say something like, well, more light means more safety, so prove that for me. Right? And they trot out statistics to prove prove to me that the sun is bad for your eyes. Well, this guy has some retinal damage, and if he had worn sunglasses for the last 30 years, he wouldn't have that. Yeah, but he might have gotten prostate cancer when he was 41 instead. You understand what I'm saying? So the trade-offs in that. How do we step back from this? Like the lighting issue, the assumption, Jane and I have discovered it, is more light equals more safety. That's never been proven. Nobody has ever proved that. Never been proven. Assumption?
It's linear thinking.
So then
Yeah, we don't
that
want to
means that if
really
you,
understand things.
that's right, and that now there's been something happened outside this building that's a criminal thing or whatever, liability related, somebody slipped, whatever you want, right? That's because we need more of that assumption there, and then more of that assumption there. And so now you perpetuate this, and it gets cheaper and cheaper with LED lights. Now you're stuck in this cycle, this trap. And this podcast is meant to break out of that trap, that status quo bias. Get out of the status quo bias. How do you do that in science?
Well, the first thing is you have to look for the hidden bias, as a consumer.
Mm.
I'm not popular with the lighting manufacturers on LinkedIn when I make my comments because, they publish their great new stuff and they go, oh, look how great this is. And I go, this is terrible. You're ignoring the evidence, and it's true. Whenever there is evidence that goes against your livelihood, you're going to have a cognitive dissonance to not want to believe that. You know what I mean? Because if your wallet, your pocketbook is affected by this information, you don't really want to hear that.
I think it's worse than that. I think it's even worse than that. You ever meet like a smoker that doesn't believe smoking causes lung cancer? They're still out there. Like there's
but that's
like,
again,
so it doesn't
cognitive
even
dissonance.
It's affecting exactly. It's affecting their pocketbook, but they just can't admit they're wrong. Like that's the. I think that's even
look,
more
we
powerful.
all have
than the
core
money.
beliefs. We have core beliefs that don't even have to do with health, that we hang on to when we have no evidence, and they're actually wrong. And we'll make decisions. We'll ruin relationships over them. I mean, this gets into so many different aspects of life. But we will take a belief, and that we just won't give up that belief, even though there could be overwhelming evidence that it is not correct anymore.
And you're saying,
and it's a human foible. In other words, it's the same thing. It's that hubris to believe that we're above our technology.
Right.
Our thoughts are so powerful. Why should our thought be knocked down? Because I want to believe that, and we place it on a pedestal, and we never take it down, and we go down in flames for that belief. And so, unfortunately, nature has created a solution. And when people say survival of the fittest, your beliefs, if you won't let go of bad beliefs, nature will take you out. It's very simple, and we're seeing that.
It's interesting. In the Old Testament, they're constantly talking about idolatry, and it doesn't make sense to anybody, right? What's idolatry? They're worshiping Baal. What? Like, I don't understand that. That is nothing. Are you kidding me? There is more idolatry in our thinking than ever. People are literally worshiping all manner of crazy institutions and ideas that actually, if it wasn't for their conviction, confirmation, and group biases altogether, they would never believe them because it doesn't make any sense. But because of those things, they're literally it's a form of, in my opinion, it's a form of idolatry. Some of what goes on in our thinking in the modern world.
I agree. We've converted from having sun god and moon god and earth god to having social media god and email god and I need to have social proof god, and so these become the foundations of how we base our entire life. And we look at the people who worship the sun as a god as foolish, but yet
for sure.
I'm sure generations to come, people look back and say, they worship this little square piece of plastic. I don't understand. And this is what caused their downfall, is this small little square of plastic that they always had to hold. And then the world ended because they weren't looking up above it, and we see this. I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the people, they're in the Louvre, they're at the World Series, and they're looking at the phone and no one's looking above when there's all this world around them that's going on. And it's so sad because we do have our head in the sand as a society. And so, I hope that people listening are waking up, and, even just a little awareness of this problem in yourself can start to be the wedge to kind of help break that bond that it has over you.
That's the medium is the message. The medium is the message. Sorry, Jane.
No, that's okay. I must admit that 2 nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and I was shocked by the problem I talk about all the time, every day, light pollution. It just hit me like it was the first time, and it scared me. And it was truly an idea that kept me up at night, that we are illuminating our exteriors at night through the night. And because it's so triggering to all living things. And so I do think you're right that I wonder if this little plastic device that we hold in our phones or in our hands is the equivalent of the Roman baths, which reduced the fertility of the Roman men so that suddenly Rome fell. It could be one
Right.
of those environmental factors that really starts to change our society. And when we think about blue light, and all of us have been saying this in different ways, but that, and I loved what you said, Joshua, about this is that we're actually doing a major study right now. If you want to know what a single wavelength of light, what kind of impact that has, well, we're
Hmm.
doing that across the face of the earth, basically showing what, an over exposure to blue light does to people. And I think we're all feeling this almost numbness. We're overstimulated. We're constantly feeling tired but awake. That there's just all of these mixed messages that we feel that we kind of describe, being like, oh, I'm tired today, or I'm bored, or all these things. But this is actually the verbal anecdote of the story that's happening inside of our body. And I was on your Twitter today, and I saw you posted something about green light affecting or being used to treat migraines. And this got me
Hmm.
thinking, because when I'm talking to people who are just learning and waking up to the light pollution problem, I am always describing what it was like when we were wild. And so that was hunting and gathering under the blue dome or the green forest canopy. And so what my mind thought when I read that article that you posted was, is this something that those people are starving for being under a forest canopy outside with that beautiful green light hitting their heads, and that they're simply just not getting it. And so you also talk about the effect of light and mood. And I want to hear about the bad side of it, but I also want to hear if you have any advice for how we can lift our mood with light,
Yeah.
just to give people the other side and the incentive.
Yeah. I mean, everything you said is spot on. I mean, we are really solar deficient and blue light toxic. It's very simple. We have way too much blue light and none of the other frequencies. And blue light by itself has an inflammatory, stimulating effect that nature used in conjunction with red light. And this is why we're really in such trouble, is because we have all blue light technology without the red light. The sun has an even balance, and red light is kind of the antidote, if you will, to blue light. And so
Mm,
the other benefit is, like you said, green light. What about green light? What about yellow light? What about orange light? And, while we haven't had huge research on all the different frequencies to the way we have for, let's say, red and blue light, which are the most frequent, and um, there's going to be that day when we're going to have all this evidence. Oh, well, yellow light cures lupus. I mean, I don't know. I'm making this stuff up. But in other words, these
yeah.
frequencies are going to activate different proteins. And so, yes, just get outside. It's very simple. But what is the benefit of all these other frequencies? Well, for one is, we have an opioid crisis today. And
Mm,
we didn't have this when I was a kid. Kids did drugs, but it was not, as bad as it is today. And we have this mood problem where kids are shooting each other up, and suicide. I mean, I think pretty soon, teenage suicide will be the number one cause of death in that age group, and it will pass accidents. It used to be motor vehicle accidents and other tragedies. But, what is the benefit of going out in the sun? Well, there is a protein called POMC, POMC, and it's an acronym. It stands for pro-opiomelanocortin. And opio sounds like opioid, and it's part of that protein is cleaved and turned into your body's natural opium, which is called beta endorphins. And so if you ever had that like really good feeling after being outside all day, you know, that's because you literally were creating natural opioids in your body. And,
mm,
nature designed you to be addicted to the sun. I mean, it's a weird thing.
mhm,
And we talked about this kind of aversion to the sun, and it's an adjustment thing. Unfortunately, the more we're away from it, the harder it is for our body to accept that light when we get exposed to it. And this is why, as you said, you wear the sunglasses and it becomes you're addicted to the sunglasses. The opposite is true, that the sun seems to hurt when you're unable to have the chemical processes and the all the necessary receptors to absorb that light. And as you lose those receptors, if you will, those catching gloves for the light photons, if you will, then all of a sudden it seems like it hurts you. But the more time you spend outside, and you can slowly build that back up. But unfortunately, people think, oh, this is, again, it's that linear thinking. The sunlight hurts my eyes. They tell me light is bad. I stay out of the sun. It's very, it's a very cut and dry system. But, you go out in the sun, you feel good. Again, you will start to balance your hormones. You'll start to create, appropriate amounts of hormones. I mean, one of the things that people don't realize is hormones are supposed to go up and down too. And light turns them on and off. And when you don't ever get the signal to turn off hormones, that's another problem. So you can be constantly putting out tons of hormones. I mean, let's just think about, when we were kids, when puberty happened in children. And let's think about the differences that we see today. And do we think that technology and lights and clocks are another component of why they're having such early puberty? I mean, I see 20 and 30-year-olds that have no testosterone. That's when your testosterone is supposed to be at its peak. How can you have low testosterone when you're actually at the age that it should be at its peak? I mean, people have to ask the right questions if they want to find out what's going on. I mean, we can't say, well, low T. Where did that come from? It came from somewhere, right? And these are usually the musclehead guys, I hate to say it, that are in the gym under blue light 24/7. And guess what? When you work out under blue light, working out is a very stressful event in and of itself. When you do it under very stressful light, you are making sure, and this is with or without steroids and all the other bad things that weightlifters do, but people will always blame it on steroids and other obvious, simple things without understanding the physics of how it works. And this is, again, one of the problems, is that our core belief of how biology works, if it's not based on physics, we've already missed some of the information that we need to make a good decision.
I think
there are tons of good reasons.
I think biology is going to go deeper than physics. Like, they say that physics is like, that you stack them, physicists, chemists, and there's like the physicists are the best. Like they actually act that way too. They kind of look down on everybody else, the physicists. But
well, it's very complex, so they like to say that you can understand it, only I can.
Yeah, they a lot of times they sound like preachers, those guys, when you listen to them. But anyway, it's interesting that you said being awake to the fullest in the sun, out in nature, leads to being asleep to the fullest. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's correct. I like how you said that. The best way to be awake to the fullest is to get the sun, and that sets up the stage, because melatonin is a chemical that's activated and created in the morning. It's created in the morning, but it's activated at night. And so, again, that's without blue light. And if you're exposed to blue light, you won't activate it, or the timing will be way too late to make all the beneficial effects. And remember, we've been talking about cancer. I mean, I think cancer is something that wakes people up. Melatonin has anti-cancer properties. So, I mean, I mentioned that Harvard study. There's very good links to breast cancer and prostate cancer. So there's a lot of great information. Again, I've never seen a breast cancer survivor that's been told that blue light was related to their breast cancer, or that was given instruction on how to mitigate blue light. I mean, there was a study showing that tamoxifen, which is a breast cancer drug, with and without blue light blocking, there was better results with blue light blocking and tamoxifen than without. I'm sure that there are no doctors, oncologists are giving this information. And this is crucial, because basically what people don't realize is the biggest thing that we've missed is circadian biology and epigenetics. Circadian biology is way more important, and that gets into the physics. And epigenetics is involved with the environment, right? And that's why your dark skies are really an example of how we're changing the environment. The lack of dark skies is the environmental change. And it's
the most pervasive
it's
symbol
That's the word I was
of
looking for.
human destruction of the planet. It's the most pervasive symbol
Absolutely.
of that.
And epigenetics is what runs. Our bodies were designed to adapt to new environments. It's strange to say, but we were evolved with the changing environment, and we've adjusted to all those changes. But this has happened over thousands and millions of years, really. But what we have done in 10 to 20 years has been so extreme in terms of the electromagnetic spectrum that now we're exposed to. And we have no real idea onto how to control that in terms of our biology. And that's really, again, the world we live in is the greatest experiment of electromagnetic frequencies and human biology. But it's the environment. Ultimately, our genes only get turned on when the environment dictates it. It's the reason, example I give is there are centenarians. People have lived to over 100. And there are centenarians who have the breast cancer gene, but they didn't develop breast cancer. Why is that? Because our genetics are not our destiny. Our destiny is determined by the environment that we put them in. And if we allow the wrong frequencies to turn on those genes, you can expect, that they're gonna act up. But you can change your environment, and then this way you don't have to have those expression of those bad genes.
You just blew my mind a little bit with the epigenetics and your description of the fact that someone could have a gene and still not get the disease. And I
Right.
think that our world around us has changed so dramatically. And that's why I do bring up the analogy to the fall of Rome, because I feel that it's a vicious cycle in that we have disconnected our hearts and our minds from the night sky. So there's a spiritual problem there. And then we are really kind of just overstimulating our entire nervous system. So there's almost a perception problem, and then that's impairing our thinking. It's degrading our thinking. So it's a vicious cycle in that we aren't really even operating at our best to reassess the problem as of yet. So I think that and then when you get into the fact that we are also making ourselves sicker on top of that, it really is just a problem that I hope my great hope still remains that we can flick the lights off and fix this with awareness. That awareness can really be the solution, and conversations like this with experts like yourself, Joshua. Mike, do you have any final questions? We're coming up on the hour.
I got a lot here that we could go. I don't think we could open up another area with because we could go off on it. But the what's interesting is in what all like kind of summarizing everything you said is that it seems like to me that humans or they're in what you talked about with Rome, it's almost like we're programmed for self-destruction or something like that. It just it's like for example, let's just take the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so Ontario's been locked down for 8 months. Okay, now whatever you want, whatever side of the thing you are, wherever you are on that spectrum of disagreement to that, let's set that aside for a second. Okay, so that means maybe Ontarians are very compliant. Say, for example, I don't know what the reason is. Okay, but you know what was interesting? They increased the restrictions and they increased the restrictions and then they increased the restrictions again over the course of about 2 weeks. They shut all the schools. They did this other thing and then they closed the playgrounds. Okay? And there was this massive uproar. Okay? Right? Like all of a sudden everyone said, "You better not do that." And they had like police enforcement of closed playgrounds. Okay?
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, all the police chiefs started to tweet out, "We're not enforcing these laws. They're not constitutional. We won't do it." They tweeted it out, like the York Regional Police tweeted it out. And like what they said is, if you're outside of your house doing any activity, you could be stopped by police and questioned, right? And all the police chiefs said, "No, we're not going to do that. No, sorry, not going to happen." And so all of a sudden, there's this uproar. And then on Monday, all of a sudden, the science or the political science or whatever science they're looking at change, and all of a sudden, they're okay now. And so it's interesting to me because I know as a man who has 4 kids, I know that if my kids don't go outside of the house every day for at least a couple hours, they're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Okay? Especially when they're little kids. All right? And so it's interesting. I believe in the wisdom of crowds, actually. I believe that when you have an uproar like that, you've crossed a line of some kind. Like there's a wisdom to that sort of in the general population. And so do you believe that the vast majority of humans are in fact sick in some way, or the vast majority in humans in the West, say Western nations or well-lit nations, whatever it is, China may
Mm.
be included in that, are sick and suffering in some way as a mass chronic disease that we're all kind of ill of? Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that the pandemic has shown is that healthiness is not an external picture of what you look like. Because,
Mm.
and it's like the 20-year-old I mentioned that could be ripped with muscles ready to go on the cover of Men's Health magazine and has no testosterone. They're rotting on the inside, right? So how you look, while it's great to be thin and have six-pack abs and, big, huge muscles, what really counts is what's on the inside. And that's both spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, right? But the truth is you can't see that. So, people are shocked. They go, I can't believe, he was 40 years old and he just dropped dead of COVID, or he dropped dead of a heart attack, or he got cancer, and it's always a shock to people. But with what I've told you today, it's really not a shock to me, because these people are not healthy in the way that we're talking about wellness being some quotient that is not disease. As a physician, I was taught to find and monitor diseases, but I was not taught to monitor wellness. So it's like, how negative is the number versus how positive is the number? If you sit at the number 0, you're one little push away from a negative number. But if you sit at 100, there's 100 steps before you get to a negative number, right? So what is your wellness quotient? How do you judge that? What are we doing as a society? We're not doing anything, right? I mean, that's, why did I get into wellness? Because I realized that we're missing the boat. It started with sleep. We affected sleep. The reason we overpopulate, and there's a great book called Lights Out. I'm blanking on the author right now, and he talks about that firelight affected our hormones just enough to allow fertility to be a much wider range of the year than just kind of in the short period of time that it used to be. And that boost in fertility allowed us as humans to kind of take over the planet, if you will. And so,
You just opened up another hour, brother.
I'm not going to do it. We're not going to do it. Well, maybe you'll have me back.
I have
yeah.
the sunglasses. Second to
on.
the sunglasses is my fascination with humans' relationship to fire. So we have to have him back on, Jane.
Yeah.
We have to have him back
Absolutely.
on. Wow.
Fire's big.
Wow. Well, that was fascinating, Joshua. Do you have any final words for our listeners that you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there is a way to take the light that you're being exposed to and change it. And, start by kind of getting some information. I'm sure you'll have my website and such, but there are, get some resources, learn about what blue blocking glasses are, learn about what good light is, get outside, some simple things. Just disconnect yourself from technology, do a little digital detox. And when you start to feel better, know that that is your body talking to you, and then learn more. Obviously, there's a lot of education that has to go on to really the awareness side here, just knowing there's a problem, but then what do I do? And it's very overwhelming. So, but, I'm here to help, and help teach people about this stuff. So.
Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to dig into your expertise here on the Starving for Darkness podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Starving for Darkness. Before you go, though, I want you to listen to Greg Eric, co-host of the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast, and I talk about the magicians. Yeah. Down at Evluma, Greg, EVLUMA.com, rethinking LED in all directions, brother.
That's right, and they're doing that with their OmniMax. We talked about at the beginning, but who has 2K? Nobody. They have 2K, they have 22K, 24K, 27K, all the twos covered. If you need
Keep
a 2K
it in the twos, brother.
anywhere, you've got it covered with this. And then they have multiple wattages, and it's got that surge protection we talked about, 10-year warranty, photo control, fail-safe, hands down the best cob on the market.
That surge protection is the bomb, man. Just not getting blown out, covering off the photocell, keeping it things real magic inside that fixture for you, keeping it low on the Kelvin temperature side, but also offering applications for other color temperatures as well. Rethinking LED in all directions. This whole industry needs a reset, and I'm so happy that Evluma is on the cutting edge of that. Go to EVLUMA.com.